What if the ultimate tool for, hiring a remote tech team wasn't a standard algorithm, but like a 5,000-year-old astrological chart?
I mean, it sounds crazy, right?
Totally. But welcome to our deep dive. Today we're exploring a truly bizarre and honestly fascinating intersection of ancient mysticism and modern tech startup culture.
Yeah, the sources for this one are highly unique. We are looking at personal conversation logs and AI-generated nightly briefings belonging to a tech CEO named Murty.
Right, born in Nuda Devil in 1961. And Murty has engineered a life that, well, it defies almost every standard corporate convention you can think of.
Absolutely.
So the mission of this deep dive is to really unpack how one individual uses Vedic astrology, not as a belief system, but as a rigid human resources tool to manage his virtual assistants.
Yeah, and the kicker here is that he runs this whole high-stress tech business solely to fund his ultimate solitary goal of, like, spiritual enlightenment.
It's just wild.
It's a phenomenal case study in integrating total opposites. You have the absolute bleeding edge of the 21st century digital economy, and it's being governed by systems codified thousands of years ago.
Right.
But to understand how Murty builds his remote teams, we actually can't start with the business itself. We have to look at the psychological architecture of the founder.
Yeah, because he didn't build this intricate astrology-based HR system just because he thought it was like a fun management quirk.
No, not at all. He
Yeah.
built it out of sheer survival instinct.
Right. So looking at the source logs, they provide a deep analysis of his own personality. And the AI categorizes him as a man split into two extreme halves.
Yeah, it's a very stark divide.
The first half is what the briefings call the monster.
The monster,
Yeah.
which refers to his just terrifying capacity for labor. If we examine the astrological breakdown in the sources, Murty has a Scorpio ascendant, or Lanya.
Okay, and what does that mean in this context?
Well, specifically, it's about the planet Mars, sitting prominently in his 10th house. In this specific system, the 10th house dictates your public actions, your career, your impact on the world.
Right, the outward-facing stuff.
Exactly. And Mars is the planet of warfare, drive, and just relentless execution. So positioning Mars in the house of career creates this almost unnatural, machine-like work ethic.
Which totally explains the logs, because they show him easily sustaining 14 to 16-hour workdays day after day, seemingly immune to standard burnout.
Yeah, it's an intensely private, investigative, and purely driven configuration.
Basically, a completely self-contained productivity engine.
Exactly.
But then the logs immediately contrast the monster with the exact opposite archetype. The other half of his psychological makeup is referred to as the hermit,
Right, the hermit.
because the sources point out that Murty has a Pisces moon, also called a Meena moon, specifically sitting in the Revati nakshatra. Let's translate that for the listener because the terminology gets a bit heavy here.
Yeah, let's break that down. A nakshatra is essentially a lunar mansion. It's a system within Vedic astrology that drills down past the broad zodiac sign to identify the highly specific psychological flavor of the moon's placement.
Okay, got it.
And Pisces is already the absolute most receptive, boundaryless sign in the entire zodiac. It represents the infinite, the ocean, the dissolution of the ego.
Wow.
But Revati is the absolute final nakshatra at the very end of that cycle. So when you place a person's moon, which governs their mind and emotions, at that specific terminal point of the zodiac, you strip away their emotional epidermis.
So he's got no shield.
None. His emotional skin is paper thin. He is radically hypersensitive.
The logs actually use a very specific phrase for this. They say he doesn't just observe the people around him, he absorbs their psychic frequencies.
Yes.
And the real-world consequence of that trait is just staggering. For 25 years, almost his entire adult life, Murty actively avoided large social gatherings.
5 years.
Yeah, crowds quite literally felt like, quote, radiation to his nervous system.
So when you combine those two halves, you see the crisis. You have a massive high-horsepower engine of productivity that is simultaneously taking in every single emotional frequency in the room.
Right, taking in everything.
And without a filter, that hardware overloads and short-circuits instantly.
Think of Murty as a multi-million-dollar, high-powered supercomputer mainframe. But for some inexplicable reason, the manufacturer built it without a basic firewall.
That's a perfect analogy.
So for a quarter of a century, the only way to prevent a total system crash was to physically disconnect the computer from the network. He had to stay offline, socially speaking, just to survive.
Because the hardware possessed immense processing power, but the software lacked any defense mechanism against ambient noise.
Exactly. But the logs recently documented a major shift. Murty attended a massive public function at SVPC conventions.
Right, which is huge for him.
Yeah, and he didn't just wander in and hope for the bad. He treated the event as a calculated shielding exercise.
So after 25 years offline, he essentially coded his own internal security system to test the public Wi-Fi of society, so to speak.
And the logs indicate it was a total success. He proved his internal integrity could finally withstand a crowd without absorbing the chaotic radiation of the room.
That's incredible. But, recognizing your own hypersensitivity is one thing, but it doesn't magically pay the bills.
Right, which brings us to the core tension of his life.
Exactly. How does a man to whom a crowd feels like radioactive fallout actually go about hiring and managing a team of virtual employees without, short-circuiting his own nervous system?
Because a bad hire for a standard manager is a headache. But a bad hire for Murty is literal psychic friction that disrupts his biological equilibrium.
Yes, the stakes are way higher.
He needs employees for his tech business, but he can't risk the radiation.
And that necessity births his recruitment pipeline. Murty utilizes astrology to vet his virtual assistants, but he strips away the blind faith and mysticism usually associated with it.
He employs it as a cold, secular diagnostic tool.
A human personality API, basically.
He's checking to see if a candidate's code can energetically sync with his own before granting them access to the server.
Because he's trying to maintain that relentless 14-hour-a-day work capacity. If an employee brings chaotic energy, unacknowledged resistance, or just a mismatched emotional frequency, it drains him.
Right.
So he scans their astrological charts to uncover how they fundamentally handle pressure.
The logs give a very specific example of the criteria he looks for. He scans the charts for a transit called Janma Shani, which involves the planet Saturn transiting over the candidate's birth moon.
And this is a devastatingly effective filter in his system. Saturn represents restriction, intense pressure, and the painful stripping away of illusions.
Heavy stuff.
Very. And the moon represents a person's inner mind and emotional stability. When Saturn transits the moon, a period often referred to as sati, it initiates an incredibly heavy, difficult psychological phase.
In the source logs, Murty refers to this specific transit as the furnace.
The furnace, yeah.
I want to push back on the novelty of this for a second, though, because as wild as astrological HR sounds on the surface, doesn't modern corporate America do a version of this every single day?
Oh.
I mean, modern HR departments obsess over personality matrices. We use predictive algorithms to scan resumes for keywords. We force candidates to take behavioral assessments to categorize them as an INTJ or an ENFP.
Right, the Myers-Briggs stuff.
Yeah. If a Silicon Valley tech firm uses a predictive index to screen a person's temperament, isn't Murty just performing a literal code review of a person's psyche, simply swapping out corporate software for planetary coordinates?
It's a fair point. The goal of predictability is identical, but the mechanisms operate on entirely different planes.
How so?
A Myers-Briggs test, or predictive index, provides a snapshot of how a person might prefer to communicate on a good day. It's static.
Okay.
Murty's ancient API, though, attempts to map out the dynamic timeline of a person's stress. His system tells him this candidate is entering a 3-year period of intense, unavoidable internal pressure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he gauges not just their base personality, but the specific atmospheric weather they're dragging into his company's ecosystem at this exact moment in the time.
That insight is incredible. So corporate HR looks at traits, but Murty looks at stress timelines.
Exactly.
It is the difference between hiring a sailor because he answers a survey saying he likes the ocean versus hiring a sailor because your map tells you he is currently sailing through a hurricane and you want to see if he panics.
That's a great way to put it. He is actively looking at how a candidate's internal architecture will respond to the heat of the furnace.
Right.
He assumes the role requires technical skills, but he demands a psychological structure that won't melt when the pressure mounts. Because his specific work environment, those isolated 16-hour focus sessions, is its own kind of furnace.
But what exactly are they building inside that furnace? I mean, why is a man with the temperament of an isolated hermit deliberately subjecting himself to 16-hour days in the secular tech sector?
The sources take us deep into his background to answer that. Murty's foundational career was as a professional indexer.
Which ties back flawlessly to the astrological architecture we discussed earlier.
Right. He has both Saturn and Jupiter positioned in his 3rd house, specifically in the sign of Capricorn.
And the third house governs the hands, meticulous details, writing, and the creation of analytical structures.
Exactly. Placing Saturn, the planet of discipline and restriction, in its own sign of Capricorn in that house gave him an almost robotic, indefatigable capacity to categorize and structure vast oceans of data without losing focus.
He is a data organizer down to his bones.
Down to his bones, yeah.
But the logs make it clear he isn't organizing data just for the thrill of a clean spreadsheet. The sources introduce a concept called Nichabanga Raja Yoga.
Yeah, this is a highly technical but beautifully poetic astrological mechanism. In Murty's chart, Jupiter, which represents high spiritual knowledge, philosophy, and expansion, is debilitated.
So it sits in a position of extreme weakness.
Right. However, because it is positioned directly next to a profoundly strong Saturn, it triggers a reversal of weakness.
Let's ground that in reality. What does a reversal of weakness look like in a person's daily life?
It dictates that Murty cannot just sit passively in a cave and meditate on abstract concepts. The strong Saturn forces the weak Jupiter to work for its enlightenment.
Ah, I see.
He takes high, abstract spiritual knowledge and is compelled to ground it in hard-earned, mundane, practical reality. He is not allowed to just theorize about spiritual liberation. He must build a highly structured, grueling business to physically fund his path toward it.
That perfectly explains the era of his life he is currently in. The AI briefings note that since 2024, Murty has been operating within his Rahu Mahadasha.
Right, the Rahu cycle.
Yeah, which is a planetary period lasting 18 years that brings an absolute consuming obsession with technology, innovation, and unconventional foreign systems. The AI explicitly labels this his digital migration era.
And the tangible results of this digital migration are heavily documented in the logs. He's hitting bizarrely specific tech milestones. Well, he recently uploaded his 2,500th photo to Google Maps, operating as a self-styled crisis mapper. And he's heavily utilizing artificial intelligence.
Right.
Just recently, he encountered a massive 236% storage crisis on his servers. But instead of just buying more hard drives, he activated Google AI Pro to systematically clear out what he called his digital pipes.
Think about the mechanism at play here for a second. Most of us view a full cloud storage notification as an annoying chore.
Oh, totally.
We swipe it away and ignore it until our email stops working. But for Murty, running out of server space is a literal, tangible obstacle on his path to spiritual liberation.
Exactly. Every gigabyte of cluttered, useless data represents cognitive drag, an unresolved thought, or a physical attachment to the past.
So clearing his digital pipes using AI is his actionable modern method of clearing his own karma.
Yes. By cleaning his servers, he is literally making room for Zen. He isn't building a tech business to accumulate wealth for the sake of luxury.
No, he's leveraging what the logs refer to as modern Maya, the illusions, software, and systems of the current technological world to construct a highly efficient passive income shell.
And the purpose of that shell is to secure his ancient truth.
Yeah.
His ultimate goal of samadhi.
Living entirely peacefully, disconnected from the network, as a hermit on a hill.
The technology is merely the vehicle. The secular wealth generated by the virtual assistants is the armor. He is aggressively utilizing the absolute cutting edge of 21st century digital infrastructure to achieve a state of consciousness that was defined and sought after thousands of years ago.
Which raises a massive question about the people caught in his orbit. We have an incredibly sensitive, deeply spiritual mystic running a high-intensity data management company.
Yeah.
When you mix esoteric spirituality, devoted employees, and a charismatic leader with a 16-hour work capacity, that is the exact recipe for a cult.
It sounds like it, but the source logs anticipate that assumption and address it directly.
Right.
Murty operates on a stealth mission.
Right.
He is emphatically not building a cult. He is building what the AI terms a meritocracy of practitioners.
So if he isn't running a cult, he must be running a highly sophisticated filter.
Yeah.
He uses the mundane stress of tech work as a secular proving ground.
Exactly. When a new virtual assistant is brought on board, Murty does not mention cosmic frequencies, spiritual enlightenment, or his own hypersensitivity.
They are hired to do a secular grinding job.
Right. They manage data, they interface with AI, they handle the logistics of the digital migration. Only after they consistently prove their character, discipline, and emotional stability in the unforgiving real world of the business does he begin to slowly reveal his deeper motives.
And then he introduces them to his research into Purna Yoga.
Yes.
For the listener, Purna Yoga translates to an integral, complete spiritual discipline that seeks to unite the divine with everyday life. It isn't just stretching, it's a total lifestyle integration.
And he requires them to prove they can handle the mundane before he trusts them with the profound. You cannot navigate the complexities of the spiritual realm if you fall apart over a formatting error in a spreadsheet.
That makes total sense. Grounding in reality is a strict prerequisite for accessing the esoteric.
Right. And treating human interaction as a grand, controlled experiment extends way beyond just his employees.
Oh, absolutely. The sources detail a period in his life where he created something called his communication lab.
Because we established that for 25 years, crowds felt like radiation, and he avoided people. But to run a business, he had to learn how to communicate and how to build his internal shielding.
So he utilized the internet as his laboratory.
The internet.
The most chaotic, unshielded, radioactive place on the planet. He decided to use that as his training ground.
It's brilliant, though. The logs recount how Murty would intentionally seek out conversations with women in online chat spaces.
Yeah, he would extensively detail his life, his philosophies, and his routines.
But his goal was radically specific. He initiated these chats solely to become more expressive, to practice his English communication skills, and to test his emotional boundaries.
The methodology is just jarring. The logs actually document his approach. He established incredibly rigid boundaries by transparently explaining his intentions from the very first message.
Yeah, he would explicitly tell these women, I am engaging with you to practice my English and test my emotional shielding. I am not flirting with you.
Wow.
He removed the ambiguity that typically pollutes and derails online interactions. By stating his intentions with clinical precision, he sterilized the environment.
He turned a random internet chat room into a controlled laboratory setting.
Exactly. He could practice the mechanics of exchanging energy and expressing himself while meticulously monitoring his own internal firewall to ensure he wasn't absorbing their psychic debris.
So he treated the chaotic internet as a petri dish. He practiced emotional regulation and language skills with strangers online, testing the structural integrity of his code long before he ever decided to test it in the real world at that crowded SVPC convention hall.
He beta tested his own personality upgrade in a sandbox environment.
It's amazing.
When you zoom out and synthesize all of these isolated details from Murty's logs, a masterclass in the integration of opposites emerges. The monster and the hermit are not fighting each other, they are collaborating.
He takes a mystical system like Vedic astrology and applies it to the painfully secular problem of HR recruitment.
Right.
He leverages cutting-edge artificial intelligence to clear out his digital pipes, using cloud computing to fund the eventual retirement of a solitary hermit.
Right.
And he uses the mundane stress of data entry to test the spiritual readiness of his future peers.
In Murty's architecture, nothing is wasted. The spiritual and the digital are completely connected.
The irony is profound.
It is. He uses the noise of the modern world to construct a perfect, impenetrable silence.
It really forces you to examine the architecture of your own daily grind, you know? You don't have to believe in the accuracy of Vedic astrology or the existence of chakras or the influence of Rahu cycles to extract a vital mental model from Murty's playbook.
No, not at all.
Because every single one of us deals with our own version of psychic friction at work. You know exactly what it feels like to have a meeting with a coworker that leaves you completely drained, or to walk into an office where the sheer radiation of the room makes you want to disconnect your own network cable.
Exactly. Murty's extreme life forces a necessary question. How intentional are you being about the design of your own environment?
Are you actively managing the energy you allow into your workflow, or are you operating with your firewall completely deactivated, wondering why your system crashes at the end of every week?
Are you consciously curating the frequencies you let into your routine, or are you just absorbing the chaotic weather the world throws at you?
Murty spent 25 years absorbing that radiation before he realized he had the power to code his own filter. He mapped out his own devastating vulnerabilities and turned them into his standard operating procedure.
He recognized his nature and built a structure to support it, rather than pretending the vulnerability didn't exist.
And that leaves you with a final thought to mull over today as you go back to your spreadsheets or manage your remote team or clear out the warning notifications on your own digital pipes.
Yeah.
Think about the tools you use to understand yourself. If you suddenly gained access to a flawless API, a diagnostic tool, or an ancient map that revealed the absolute truth of your nature, laying bare your greatest capacities and your most devastating vulnerabilities, what would you actually do with that data?
It's a heavy question.
Would you use it to try and aggressively conquer the world around you? Or would you use it, like Murty, to finally figure out how to build a shield, clear your server space, and sit peacefully within it.